We've all been asking for this for years, but Nintendo finally, begrudgingly, let it happen. Mario 3D All-Stars, a collection of all the 3D Mario games, or the mainline 3D Mario games. I mean, those prior to the Wii U, and not Galaxy 2, one of the four I wanted to play the most actually, because I guess fuck that game in particular. Not because they couldn't fit it in a Switch card, of course. Galaxy's on a DVD, Sunshine is on the disc the size of a bagel bite, and I've read Twitter threads longer than Super Mario 64. I don't know what I expected from a company that can't even center the logo on their game carts. Regardless, for your $60, you get some wildly acclaimed, groundbreaking 3D platformers revered for their gameplay and atmosphere as much as their influence. And also you get Super Mario Sunshine, which is probably my favorite of the bunch because I'm an unbearable contrarian. These games, as far as people far more talented and smarter than me seem to be saying, are pretty much emulations of the game running at higher resolutions, which is far from a full remake or even a remaster based on your incredibly complex definition of whatever those are. But seeing as the original games ran somewhere between 240p and 480p, can't complain too much. I mean, I can, but this is a far cry from the original Super Mario All-Stars, which remade the games and altered the physics and transitioned from NES to Super NES, but I suppose it's better than hearing people complain about how they ruined Mario. And who knows how uncanny a remade 64 would look with more modern graphics, but I guess that's enough mumbo jumbo. Let's talk about the games. The version of Mario 64 you see here has never been seen in America, officially licensed by Nintendo. It is actually Mario 64 Shindo, hacked backwards with the English translation, of course upgraded to 720p with a few better textures and updated text from what I can tell. What is Shindo, you ask? It is an upgraded revision of Mario 64 released only in Japan, namely for adding rumble support, which never came to the US, of course. There's also some other changes from the American 64 back to the Japanese version, such as Peach's voice acting and bug fixes, and some things new to this version from the American version, besides the rumble, such as some animations, fixing glitches like the backwards long jump just to piss off speedrunners, and worst of all, the death of Gay Bowser. Besides that, there's not too much I can say about Mario 64 that hasn't said before. Its influence knows no bounds, but man has it aged weirdly. The core gameplay loop concept mainly works, with the exception of being booted out after each star, ruining immersion a lot of the times. Thankfully, you aren't booted after the honestly grueling 100 coin stars, so I can't fault that too much. A few stages are annoying by making you redo parts for different stars, especially the more vertical stages, which are annoying by how damaging falling can be as well. The controls just don't feel right after playing more recent platformers. Mario has more momentum than his more recent outings, and he kinda has to circle around when he changes directions rather than instantaneously changing, making narrow platforms just the biggest pain. Hitboxes on things like stars don't always feel accurate. Maybe I'm used to things with a bit more give. Most importantly, the camera sure is the Mario 64 camera. It turns in increments rather than a smooth move, since it was meant for buttons, not an analog stick, and after a certain amount of degrees, it just refuses to turn, leaving you to walk half-blindedly into the camera. Despite all this though, grabbing stars is still incredibly addicting. The level of challenge when you're not finding the controls or camera is a perfect slope. There's a reason people clamor for this game constantly, and while I certainly have my issues with it, I find myself coming back to it every once in a while, even if it's generally only for the first few levels before dropping again. Mostly before I always dread Rainbow Ride and Tick-Tock Clock, and the game constantly reuses music, which the music's great, it gets stale quickly, especially the freaking slider theme used on all of the worst levels of the game. Now, I'm not going to tell you that Super Mario Sunshine is an underrated gem, but it is probably one of my more favorite of the Mario games and holds a special place in my heart. Isle Delfino is the next step forward from something like Peach's Castle and feels like a living, breathing world. The presentation is fantastic with a more consistent theming, more than like 5 songs in the entire game, and is beautifully presented here in 1080p widescreen, where Mario 64 just couldn't, I guess. The control, while still having some faults, especially in the camera, feels much improved. However, the game certainly falters under the weight of its own ambition. It's not hard to see that the game was pushed out a little faster than expected due to the GameCube's poor sales, being the first Nintendo system not to launch with a Mario game in the West and the strong offerings from the juggernaut that the PS2 became. This apparently led to some cut levels and the feeling of the game being a little less polished. There's been lots of videos online lately of people just phasing through objects, and again, the camera could use a bit more work. There's also a stronger focus on the story than any Mario platformer before it, and introduces Bowser Jr. on his quest to steal Peach, who he thinks is his mother because biology and Bowser said so. And you can't forget the truly awful voice acting, which for me honestly adds to the charm, purely on how cheesy and bad it is. The game really gets through on its theme of a Hawaii-influenced tropical island, with all of its locales fitting neatly within and even able to see other areas in the distance. This leads it to feel much more of a place than 64 at the cost of a little less level variety. As far as gameplay, the main gimmick is Flood, your water jetpack, which lets you spray things, hover for time, blast off, or go really fast. The hover really helps correct mid-air movement, the spray is for puzzles and enemies, and the others exist. They were also meant to show off the GameCube's analog triggers, which aren't on most Switch controllers, so the trigger lets you shoot while running and the bumper instead stops and aims. It works, I guess, even if the aim controls are inverted from what I remember to something more useful, but it's fighting my muscle memory at every point. The game does have a lot of levels like Mario 64 where you get to part of a level, get booted out, and gotta do it again, but it works better in my opinion for more change happening between these levels, things moved around, new enemies, different messes, even time of day and night in some levels, to a greater degree than Mario 64. And then you have the levels without Flood, which exist in a really bizarre nth dimension with a kick-ass acapella Mario melody, which haunts me to this day, as these provide fantastic platforming challenge that some of the more exploration sections miss. Levels also contain blue coins, in which you exchange 10 for a shine, and you find throughout the levels, though these do feel a lot like padding, a little more than necessary. I love Sunshine, but yeah, a lot of that is nostalgia. Though there's something here, even if just for the overall atmosphere. At least listen to the soundtrack and check out how it looks, and hey, you have the Chuckster, so it's obviously a perfect game. On the flip side, Super Mario Galaxy decided, potentially rightly, I'm not sure at this point, that the only parts of People Sunshine liked was the linear platforming levels without Flood. So here you are, Mario Galaxy. It works since you don't have to fight the camera, I suppose, and the Wii didn't have a second analog stick, and, well, works for what it is. Personally prefer the more open-ended exploratory nature of 64 and Sunshine, but I'm sure most people think Galaxy holds up much better. It also looks fantastic upscaled here, and the Galaxy soundtrack is just absolutely phenomenal, as it is the first fully orchestrated Mario soundtrack. On the other hand, it took the transition to Switch pretty poorly, especially for playing with handheld mode or on a Switch Lite. You know how the Wii had these fancy things called motion controls? Yeah, instead of mapping them to a second analog stick or having snapping selections on the left stick like any other game's menu would, you have to use the touchscreen in handheld or motion controls in dock. The touching controls just feel absolutely clunky, especially as you have to do it by taking your hands off the controls. Pro Controller works great, and I'm sure the Joy-Cons do too, but if you're not using a first-party Nintendo controller, you may have problems. These Hori Daemon Ex Machina controllers are fantastic for most games since I have big hands, and the joysticks are leagues better than the Joy-Cons, especially when I had to send mine in for the drift, but they don't have gyro, so I ended up soft-locked in an area until I got my Pro Controller to work with it. It's honestly really frustrating as this disrupts the flow of the game, but when you're not wrestling, it's still a fantastic game with really great presentation. Linear levels, while having a bit less in the way of exploration, lead to solid platforming experience with great varied environments, since less time had to be made making a world that makes more logical sense. Not that 64 or Sunshine made the most sense, but you know. At least in some fantastic set pieces where it zooms out and you can see all the planetoids you've been on, and the larger amount of worlds leads to some really cool places you can visit. You even get dumb power-ups like Bee Mario. Like, come on, you get to pleasure a bee, what else can you do in this game? Mario controls fantastically here too, especially with the spin jump being able to be mapped to Y rather than flicking your wrist, but of course the aforementioned issue make it hard to recommend unless you're okay using a touchscreen or the Nintendo controllers on docked mode. Other than the games, you get the game soundtrack on the weird menu. You can torture me with the slide music for hours on end. And you get this weird Art Deco type menu that makes you feel in the Great Gatsby. It is the Rolling 20s after all. And each game has a little menu by pressing minus where you can view the controls and quit the game at any time to return to the main menu, which eluded my capture since it, for all intents and purposes, it just is a built-in reset button. Oh, and you can change the languages if that's what you want to. Play it in French, cool. And that's about it, really. You can't even view the old game manuals, there's no behind the scenes videos or scrapped artwork or anything like that. Hell, you don't even get a digital download of the music, you have to view it in the Switch. Since this thing is my favorite MP3 player, it feels oddly bare bones and has been criticized for it rightly, though I can be imagined would have been criticized much more if it wasn't 3 Mario games after all. There's things I really think should have been included, besides some artwork and behind the scenes, like maybe if it had Mario 64 DS, and that's like half a remake and half expanded version of Mario 64, and of course Galaxy 2 was a glaring omission. $60 feels like a bit much, especially considering the whole limited run that I don't even want to talk about now and how awful I think that is, but considering how much 64 and Sunshine are going for nowadays, it's better than the alternative. Unless you're a Mario 64 speedrunner, I'd probably say these are the definitive legal versions of the games, if just for the upgraded resolutions. That is, if you have a Pro controller or like to play the game docked with Joy-Cons, for Galaxy at least. Pretty sure there's better emulated versions on PC in Project 64 or Dolphin, but I haven't done my research, I don't really care to. But if you are feeling the pirate way of life, go ahead. If you like and are nostalgic for Mario, I'd say go ahead and get it. If it's before March 31st and you have 60 buckaroonies to spare, or whatever. And as someone who's played these games before, I'm honestly having a lot of fun, and yeah, I'm peeved at some things, but it's still 3 Mario games that are pretty good at the very least, and I think they're worth going back to. I just find myself wishing they'd done a bit more, for the most part. At least the fanboys have to find something else to complain about for every Nintendo Direct.